record it. Oh, and the recording just started now. You need to click that button, I think, that just appeared to accept it. And you can watch all these sessions through the Moodle platform or through the Climate Walk Project's YouTube channel. So if you miss one class, no problem, you can go anytime online and watch it. So some other important organizational matters during the sessions: your microphones and your cameras are deactivated because we are quite many present here. But let's see, maybe we can manage later that during the questions session, we will open your microphones. But otherwise, you can always post your questions into the chat box. So you can see on the right-hand side, you should all have a chat box that is functioning, and you can, if you have comments or questions or anything, just write it there, and Martin and I will be checking it and reading it out loud. But now I'll hand over to Martin.
Hello, a very warm welcome also from my side. Maybe a very quick recap of last week's session for all those of you who haven't been there. So we started with a brilliant talk by Thomas Hylland Eriksen, who spoke about the Anthropocene as a game changer for the humanities. Then the Wanderers of Changing Worlds presented the Climate Walk Project, the central focal point of this lecture series, and actually also the very reason why we are here today. Their presentation was then followed by a very lively panel discussion with discussants coming from different backgrounds, revolving around different issues such as the right framing of climate change, inter- and intragenerational conflicts, and also the role of human agency in fighting the climate crisis was discussed. So thank you for all for last session and for all. And also thank you to all of you who have been there last week. So while last week was meant to be a more general introduction, with this week's class, we are dealing very specifically with probably the most important dimension of the Climate Walk Project, that is with walking, and more specifically with walking in combination with doing research. That is what, in reference to Tim Ingold, our first wonderful guest speaker today, we term footwork or fieldwork on foot. So following that, we are going to discuss today the epistemic relevance, the beauty, the methodological value, and maybe even the counter-hegemonic character of walking as a grounding way of perceiving and inhabiting changing landscapes in an ever-accelerating world, or as Thomas Hylland Eriksen would say, in an overheating world. Some of you may think now, why should something allegedly trivial as walking be the guiding topic of a university class? Why should one think more systematically about one of the most obvious things in the world that most of us do daily? Maybe now a little less with all the Zoom meetings, but most of us, of course, do it daily. So what we can promise you right now is that in today's lecture, reasons for thinking about and also for praising walking will be given by our wonderful speakers. And on that note, I stop here and hand over back to Ria, who will introduce our first guest today. In our very personal view, one of the most formidable, interesting, and originally thinking anthropologists, both literally and metaphorically walking the face of the current earth. And I hand over back to Ria. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have to say I'm indeed delighted to introduce you to our first guest of the day, who is Professor Tim Ingold. And since my own research field is in Finnish Lapland, I'm especially happy that we can host an anthropologist who has carried out his fieldwork among the Sami and the Finnish people in Lapland. So Professor Tim Ingold is a professor emeritus of social anthropology at the University of Aberdeen and has engaged with the topics of environment, technology, and social organization in the circumpolar north, on animals and human society, and on human ecology and evolutionary theory. His more recent work explores environmental perceptions and skilled practice. Also, his interests lie on the interface between anthropology, archaeology, art, and architecture. Some of his recent books include The Perception of the Environment, Lines, Being Alive, Making, The Life of Lenses, Anthropology, The Life of Lines, sorry, Anthropology and as Education, Anthropology, Why It Matters, and Correspondences, which was only published in the year 2020. So you can see it's an impressive list of only books. If we would now add all the articles as well, I think this introduction would take so much longer. So thank you very much for being here today, Tim, and we are looking forward to your talk, and the stage is yours from now on.
Well, thank you very much for that, that very generous introduction. My time has been extended. It began at 15 minutes. I think it's now expanded to 30. So it's going to be fairly informal. We'll see how it goes. But I called this talk "Walking in a Weather World," and I've deliberately chosen this phrase "weather world" rather than landscape. And so I first want to explain why I've moved from thinking about the landscape to thinking about the weather world and what the difference between those two are. The problem with landscape, as I see it, as a concept, is that it is so oriented towards the surface forms of the ground, with rather an assumption that those forms are given, whatever is going on top. And the thing that first led me to question this was to start thinking about the weather and to ask the question, if the weather is very different, say if you compare a fine sunny day and a misty day and a rainy day or a snowy day, is the landscape the same in each case? Or is actually a landscape in the mist quite different from a landscape in the sunshine or a landscape under the snow? And if the answer is yes, they are quite different, then that implies that we can't actually say what a landscape is independently of the movements of the weather. And the implication of that is that whatever we've been calling a landscape is actually something that is continuously in flux. It does not have fixed and final forms, but is as fluid and variable from one day to another as the weather is. So that was one thing. And then another thing was this sense that if we look at the ground where we're walking, we find that it's full of vegetation, and the vegetation only grows because there's an interaction between the earth and the moisture in the air and the sunlight that allows these plants to grow. That the earth, that ground itself is changing all the time, depending on, for example, has it been raining recently? Are there puddles? Is there snow? Is it frozen? Is it melted? And so on. And I began to realize that the ground itself is not that kind of fixed and stable foundation for life that we take it to be. So instead of thinking about the landscape, I then thought, well, perhaps we should say we're moving around in a world, but it's a world of weather. And by the weather, we mean all that stuff that is going on in that region known as the sky. And it's a region that we tend to neglect. I mean, there was a geographer called John Thorne, I think he was, who got very interested in the work of the painter John Constable. And Constable spent a lot of time doing very close studies of the clouds. And in his paintings, he went to a lot of trouble to paint those clouds accurately, as they should be, according to his best observations and the knowledge of the time. But this geographer then did a study of all the art historical writings on John Constable. And he found hardly a single paper that even mentioned the sky, because it was just assumed that this was landscape painting. And if you are painting a landscape, then the only thing that is interesting is the ground, the things that are on the ground, the people on the ground, what's going on there. The sky is just a background. And yet for Constable, obviously, well, the sky was really important. But it's very hard to say exactly what the sky is, because you can't define it in an objective scientific sense. It's not the same as what a scientist might call the atmosphere, meaning the sort of gaseous sphere that envelops planet Earth. The sky is something that we can only perceive from a center of being within the world. So for somebody who's standing there in an environment, the sense we have is that there is a sky arching overhead and an earth beneath us and giving us support, that the totality of that experienced world, the world of phenomena that is given to our experience, is something that is made up out of earth and sky. So instead of the landscape, I move to this idea of inhabiting an earth-sky world, the world of earth-sky. Or if you're at sea, it would be an ocean-sky world, it's the same sort of thing. But the crucial implication of that shift from landscape to earth-sky is that it completely alters our understanding of the ground. That instead of thinking of the ground as a solid platform over which we move, separating the atmosphere or the sky above from the earth beneath, the ground itself becomes a kind of zone, a zone of interpenetration in which substances welling up from the earth, for example, in the growth of plants, meet and mingle with the forces of erosion and forces of nourishment, such as rain, coming down from the sky. So what we are calling the ground is not actually a simple surface, like a sheet of paper with one top side and an underside, but something where the elements coming up from the ground meet the elements coming down from the sky. So you can't actually say how thick is the ground, because it doesn't have, in a sense, the ground only has one side, only one surface. It doesn't have another side. So it's no good saying, you might say that the ice on a lake, frozen lake, is 1 meter thick, but you can't ask that question about the ground. You can't say how thick is the ground, because it doesn't have another side. It extends infinitely in depth, but it also extends infinitely upwards as well. And it's a place, then, it's not like an interface, like you have a sheet of paper and there's the upside and there's the downside. It's not like that. It's rather the opposite. It's where forces welling up from beneath meet the forces coming down from above, and creates this zone of interpenetration. And it's in that zone that everything lives, basically. So when we, to inhabit the weather world is actually to more or less to live in the ground rather than on it, in the way that other creatures do. You don't have to be a burrowing animal to live in the ground. You know, even humans really are living in the ground as well, because the ground doesn't have a top or a bottom. It's a zone of intermingling, and so to live is to be immersed in this worlding world. And the important thing about it is that this kind of world is all the time becoming. It's not a stable world. It hasn't precipitated out into fixed and final forms. So moving from landscape to earth sky means that we move from this idea of the ground as an interface with a top side and a bottom side to the idea of the ground as an intermediate zone of interpenetration, where the constitutive forces of the earth bubbling up meet the erosive forces of the atmosphere bearing down. So then you can say, well, now we'll put the walker in this world. Okay, here he or she is inhabiting the ground in the weather world, having to cope with the elements, the forces of the elements, wind and weather above, also having to negotiate the irregularities and the qualities and characteristics of the ground underfoot. So that's our walking being. And I suppose the first question to ask about this character is is he or she walking or flying? And I came to think of this because some years ago, I was on a flight actually from London to Chicago, a British Airways flight, and there was this High Life magazine in the pocket that says you are flying British Airways, and there was I strapped to my seat, feeling very like this, without any room to move, and I didn't feel like flying at all. And it just happened that I was writing an essay about flying at the time, and thinking, what does flying actually mean? And I think, well, birds fly, but I don't think I'm flying in this aeroplane. I think in this aeroplane, I seem to be occupying a guided missile that is simply being hurtled from one place to another. Birds fly because they're doing what the aeroplane is not doing, and that is adjusting their own movements to the circulations and movements and eddies and currents of the air. And then I thought, well, actually, if I'm out walking, and particularly on a windy day and perhaps on high ground, that's what I feel too. That the walker adjusts his or her movements to the currents of air in which they're moving along. You know, if you're moving against the wind and it's very strong, you have to lean forward into it, and if it's the wind's coming from the side, you lean this way or that way. So actually, as we're moving through this world, we are adjusting our posture just as much to the currents of air as we are to the formations and qualities and irregularities of the ground. So why do we say then that we are walking rather than flying? Because really, with every step, we're also taking a breath. It might not be one breath per step or however we manage it, but as we're going along, we are both walking and breathing simultaneously. And in the way our bodies work, those two things are, in order to keep up a good walking rhythm, you have to sort of coordinate it somehow with your breath. So these two things are going along together, and if everything's going well, you know, there's a nice rhythmic synchronization of your steps and your breath. So that again links into this idea that we're walking in a world of earth and sky and not on the landscape. Because as soon as we say this is an earth-sky world, well, that means that you're in both relating to the earth through your feet, and you're relating to the sky, the atmosphere, the air through your lungs. So these two things are going on simultaneously. And you could just as well say that you're flying, but with your feet on the ground, as saying that, well, you're walking, but with your head in the air. I mean, it could work either way. So you could just as well say you're flying as you're walking, but really you're walking flying in an earth-sky world. Then the other thing about walking that is so interesting is actually how it works. I mean, that there are other creatures, or quite a few other creatures that are bipedal, that go around on 2 feet. Lots of birds, for example, when they're on the ground. But human walking is really rather extraordinary in the way it works. And I don't know whether any other creature really does this. And that is that to walk, you're continually falling over forwards. That when you take a step, you're actually putting your body out of equilibrium. You're tipping over forward. And the only reason why you don't fall over is that you quickly put your foot forward. It finds firm ground, and then you regain stability. And then you do the same thing again and again and again. So in order to walk at all, you have, with every step, to put your body at risk. I mean, actually submit to things. It's like simply like falling over, and then hoping and trusting that you'll be able to get that foot forward, get it onto some firm ground, and then you'll be held upright again. So it means that in walking along, we are continually alternating between putting ourselves at risk through a kind of exposure, just letting us taking the risk, of falling ahead of ourselves, and then alternately drawing on our own bodily skills to regain a footing, a hold in, a grip on the world. So that as we're going forwards, there's this alternation between risk and grip, between putting ourselves at the mercy of the befalling of things, and then drawing on our own skills of perception and action to regain some sort of poise and equilibrium. And I began to think that that kind of alternation is rather fundamental to human life. It might even have something to do with imagination, because I've been thinking about writing about imagination just recently, because I've written a lot about perception, and critics of my work on perception say this is all very well, but where does imagination fit into your theory? And I say I don't really know. I have to work that one out. And I realized that I've always been avoiding the question of imagination, because I'm worried that as soon as you reopen it, you also reopen the gap between humans and other animals that I've been trying to close. We don't know whether other animals imagine, and we don't really know what imagination means for us humans. But it's rather difficult to talk about human imagination without drawing on the sorts of things that humans do, like storytelling, like dreaming, which seem, on the face of it, to set us rather far apart from other animals. Whereas with talking about perception, I've really been trying to close that gap and not to say that there's anything particular about humans. I thought, well, actually, imagination is something rather peculiar to humans. This kind of bipedal walking in which we keep tipping forward, that also is peculiar to humans. So might there be a relation between our peculiar way of walking and our peculiar way of imagining? And I'm thinking of imagination not as some kind of power of mental representation, not of a capacity to set up images or to picture a world that isn't immediately present, or that existed in the past, or that might exist in the future. I'm thinking of imagination rather as what I call the stretch of human life. And by that, I mean the way in which, in our experience is always running ahead of ourselves. It's always overtaking ourselves, and we're struggling to catch up. And the problem is that catching up requires that we keep a grip on the material foundations of life. So that keeping a grip is always holding us back. But this imagination is always shooting off into the distance. And it's as though human life is caught in this tension between a fugitive imagination that always seems to be escaping from us and the need to keep a grip on the material world, which is frictionful and massive and always holding us back. And I know that experience. Everybody who's ever written anything knows that experience very well. The constant anxiety that comes from the fact that once one's ideas start going, your imagination is drifting off. You're struggling to find any words to express it, but you know there's something, and as you're doing that, you're having to try and write things down, and you can never catch up with your pen at the speed in which your imagination is falling forward. So that writing is extremely stressful because of this sense that you've imagined something, you're not sure what it is because you haven't got concepts for it yet, and it's happening quicker than you can get anything down on paper. So that's what I mean by the stretch of human life. And I think that imagination lies in there. And it may be that other creatures are not stretched in that way, but humans certainly are. So what I'm thinking about walking is that it epitomizes this peculiar human condition of always falling over ourselves, of life always speeding ahead, and a continual effort then to keep our poise and to keep our equilibrium, to keep our grip on the material world as that is going on. And the way this continually creates a tension, and it's that tension, attention actually, that allows us to move on. Because walking is fundamentally a process of attention, and attention has two sides to it. There's the attention of a skilled noticing of salient properties of the environment. So when you're walking, you attend to the properties of the ground, so that you make sure you put your foot down firmly, and so you know how to walk. You're skilled at it. That's one kind of attention. But the other kind of attention is one where you wait upon the world, where you put yourself at the behest of the befalling of things. Attendre in French means to wait. So it's about it's rather than you being a kind of skilled master of your environment. You know how to walk, you know how to manage this, you know where to put your feet. There's the other side of attention, which means that unless you put yourself at risk and expose yourself to the world and fall into it, you're not going to be able to move anywhere at all. So that attention has these two sides to it. And it means that when you're walking, it's not just something you do, it's also something that you're undergoing, because you're inside your own action. You walk, but your walking walks you. You're both the agent and the patient at the same time. And so the best way I found to express this was in what linguists call the middle voice of the verb, which is not the active, like I did this, I walked, or I went for a walk, or the passive, I was walked. Maybe a dog, if it could speak, would say, I was walked this morning. So that was something that was done to you, but something in the middle, in which you are walking, yes, but you're inside the very process of your walking. So that it is a form not of either doing or of undergoing, but of what I'm calling doing undergoing, where the very doing of something also is an undergoing which changes your very experience of the world. So in that sense, it's a continuous process of renewal, and as a process of renewal, it's also a continuous process of thought, because I think we have to think about thinking in a different way, not of thinking as a cognitive operation that goes on separately in the brain whilst you're getting on with other things, but actually thinking as like breathing, a way in which we are bodily immersed, giving to and taking from our environment rhythmically as we go, so that walking in a sense, walking in the weather world gives thinking room to breathe, and otherwise we would be confined. I've spoken for about half an hour. Will that do?
Thank you. Sorry, I had to find the button where I unmute myself. Thank you very much, Tim, for this interesting and very philosophical lecture. And actually, it was great that I finally understood why my academic writing is always so stressful. Now I know the reason for it. But we will continue now with questions from the students and from the audience. And there is already something in the chat I can see, and I will read it out loud, and then maybe you can answer it.
Okay.
Could you elaborate your idea of walking, falling forward, etc., with focus on disabled people who can't walk but still move through the ground?
That's a terrific question, and thanks for asking it. And the difficulty of answering it is, of course, it all depends on the disability. What particular disability might be in question. One thing I sort of forgot to mention and might have a bearing on this question is how we feel about the ground when we're walking on it. I think everybody has the experience that when you're out in the walk, say in the mountains or something, and you get lost, and you suddenly realize that you've gone wrong somewhere, taken the wrong path, and the landscape you see around you is not what you expected, and at that moment, the ground seems much less certain under your feet. You have the feeling that it's not just, you just can't take it for granted anymore. It doesn't carry you with the same confidence. And at the same point, you also find that you become very, very much more aware of your surroundings. Now, so-called neuroatypical people have this experience all the time. So there's writing on autism, for example, which shows that's actually how autistic people experience the ground or the environment as they're walking along, with that heightened sensitivity that we more typical people experience more often just on those occasions when we get lost. But that's an experience that they feel all the time, and it could be that with other kinds of more sort of straightforward, if I could say that, sort of locomotor disability, and people who maybe have to use a frame or a wheelchair or some other kind of prosthetic device to move about, that one of the consequences of that is that they might not be falling forward in exactly the same mechanical sense that an able person would do with both feet to work with, but they would undoubtedly be noticing qualities of the environment that perhaps the rest of us wouldn't notice. So for example, I've never used to be in a wheelchair or anything like that. But if I was, then there'd be all kinds of things related to getting around in using wheels that you wouldn't otherwise know as a two-footed person. So I think the answer I want to stress is simply that one should understand so-called disability in a positive sense. That actually the so-called disabled person can bring into the picture sensitivities, awarenesses, experiences, which enrich those of everybody else, rather than sort of like being perceived as a negative thing. I think that's what I really wanted to stress. But obviously the mechanics of it are going to depend upon precisely what kind of devices are needed.
Thank you, Tim. I can see that there are two more questions in the chat. The first one was, what is the role of an urban city in the Earth ground zone? How does this influence the concept of Earth, sky, weather, world?
Okay, now that's an easier one to answer. It does, And in a way, one of the things that is, at least in the modern era, the thing that is almost definitive of the built environment is paving. That back in the when urban paving began in the 17th, 18th centuries, it was part of the Enlightenment project, because people felt that they often felt that evil miasmas, disease, came up from under the earth, and the way to create a healthy environment was to pave it, to cover up the earth. That also made it much easier for transport, for wheeled vehicles to get about, and so that was regarded as a generally good thing to do in an enlightened, modern enlightened city. But the effect of paving, its hard surfacing of the ground, was to install a very clear separation between the sky above and the earth below. I mean, precisely the separation that most modern thought takes for granted. Modern thought takes for granted that the ground is a platform, a base, on which everything else rises. But in fact, that platform was engineered through a system of paving that both that set a barrier between the atmospheric forces above and earthy forces below. And then you have to have all kinds of manholes and things to mediate between the two. So I think that a lot of our modern understandings of landscape, of what the world is like, of how we think of the ground, the earth and the sky and the rest of it, actually have their origin in this basic operation of paving, which defined the modern city.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is from Thomas, and he asks, does maybe the concept, the grammatical voice of the mediopassive, which exists in some languages, in some way relate to your idea of being agent and patient at the same time?
Yes, it does. I mean, I think mediopassive, I think that's the same as what I read as in linguistics as the middle voice. It's not the active or the passive. It exists in many non-Indo-European languages, and also, I mean, apparently it existed in ancient Greece, for example. They had the middle voice, but for some reason it faded out in the history of most European languages, kind of during the Middle Ages. I don't know whether anybody really knows why that happens, but I find it hugely helpful. I mean, it's one reason why we sometimes find things so hard to express is because we're stuck with this opposition between the active and the passive. And I think a lot of our theoretical problems with ideas about agency and patiency derive from that. And I do think that the middle voice, or mediopassive, if that's what you want to call it, gives us a good resolution for that, a way of expressing how we can be active in the world, do things in the world, even shape the world, but we always do it from a position that is inside the very activity that we're engaged in, and that we can't get out of it.
We have another question. Now they're coming in. I think we will have, after this, maybe time for one more question, and then you have to save your questions for the next speaker. So, but Gertraud, she asks, great stuff you think about, thanks a lot. My question is, in which way does A, ever increasing acceleration of movement, and B, movement through all kinds of different means of transport and impact this way of walking as the natural way of moving of humans, being in the Earth sky zone?
Okay, let's have a look at this. In which way does A, ever-increasing acceleration of movement, and B, for me, the transport time. Right. On the ever-increasing acceleration of movement, it's kind of obvious in a way that the faster you move, the less you notice. But I think that's too simple. And when people say, as they often do these days, that we're all going too fast and we need to slow down, and then they say walking is great because it's slow and it's not fast like a car or a motorbike. It's not actually anything to do with speed as sort of measured on an instrument, kilometers per hour. How much are you traveling at 3 kilometers an hour or 30 or 300 kilometers an hour? It's not to do with that. It's to do with the very assumptions that are built into the idea that you can measure speed in that way, because that involves an assumption about movement. And when you measure, when you say I'm going at 3 kilometers per hour, that is a ratio of time to distance traveled. So you're already assuming that movement is a matter of going from A to B in a certain fixture of time. And when we're talking about how we want to go slowly, we're really rejecting that very idea that movement is about going from A to B. Because you say, well, suppose we ask the question, how fast is life? Can you measure the speed of life? And you can't. It makes no sense to ask such a kind of question, because life is not going from A to B. It's just carrying on. And if we think of walking too as simply a way of carrying on, then it's not the speed that matters. It's the fact that it is not measured in terms of a chronological time and metric distance and the ratio of one to the other. So it seems to me, for example, that many people would say, looking for freedom, looking for a way to get out of this of a social order in which everything is being measured in this way. Somebody might say, I want to ride a motorbike, and I want to go on that motorbike really, really fast. And so they're speeding on the motorbike. And it's like saying, I want to get into instead of crossing the bridge, I'm going to get into the flow of the river, and I'm going to go right down the middle of the river where the flow is most rapid. So it's not, it's not the speed that really counts. So it's the same as somebody in a kayak, might say, am I going to take my kayak along the shores of the river and fiddle around in the little pools, or shall I shoot the rapids and have fun doing that? And of course they can do both. So it's not, if you move from the motorist on the road to the kayaker, it's not a question of acceleration or deceleration. It's a question of shifting to a different register of what movement means. In the one case, measured on the dashboard, miles per hour. In the other case, a very close engagement of an ongoing movement with, for example, the ever-changing currents of the river. So that's the first question. And B, movement through all kinds of different means of transport impact on this way of walking. I can tell you a story in partial answer to that question. I only learned to drive in my mid-40s. I had to learn because my son could already drive, and if sons can do things that fathers can't, then fathers have to do something about it. So I had to learn to drive, and up till then I'd always either walked or cycled. And I found as I was speeding along at 30 miles an hour, which seemed to me to be incredibly fast, and I kept doing what walkers always do. I look this way and I look that way, and I thought, well, that's interesting. There's somebody walking on the street there, or look at that dog, or this interesting tree. And my driving instructor would be terrified because he said, you're actually supposed to be looking ahead at the road and stop turning your head this way and that. And the fact is that I still catch myself doing that. 30 years later, it's extremely difficult to get into the, once you're used to walking, it's very, very difficult to get into the habit of looking straight ahead and not being distracted by anything that can be seen on one way, one side or the other. And it just occurred to me thinking about differences in means of transport. The really crucial difference, it might not be so much about horsepower or speed, but about what kind of, most kinds of transport involve some kind of seated posture. The crucial thing is the difference between the seat and the saddle. So the saddle, or the basic saddle is from horseback, but the bicyclist would also be on the saddle, and so would perhaps be a tractor driver. You're sitting upright, but there's no back usually. There's no backrest, just a thing for your bum, and you have complete freedom to rotate your body around the back and look every which way. In the seat of a car, you can't do that. It's very, very difficult because you're really hemmed in, and you have a backrest that tells your back so you're actually leaning backwards on it rather than sitting up, and that forces you in some sense. Perhaps that's the reason for it. It forces you to simply look ahead and stop looking around. And that really does affect the way people see. So in some senses, there's a greater difference between, let us say, driving a tractor and driving a car than there is between walking and driving. I mean, that is really the key difference, the fact that you can look around everywhere and are not forced to look only ahead.
Thank you. I think that was a very nice closing thought that we can take with us. Unfortunately, time is running so fast that we have to move on. There was one more question from Joachim in the comment section. So Tim, if you have time, you could maybe type there an answer to that person while we move on with our next guest. But thank you so much.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, for this brilliant talk. I think I've never thought this way about walking, and it was a beautiful talk. So thank you very much for that. So time is running, as Ria said, or maybe time is flying, and we need to proceed with our program. And with no further ado, we're delighted to give the floor to our next speaker, Ulrich Grober, and I will quickly introduce him. So Ulrich Grober is a German publicist, broadcaster, and journalist. His work covers cultural history as well as future visions, sustainability, and ecological lifestyles. His books on the art of hiking and the idea of sustainability invite us to rediscover the essence of modern-day concepts, their soul and soft power. They had a considerable impact on discussion and led to numerous invitations to lectures at universities and civil society groups. That said, please read Ulrich Grober's books, as well, of course, as the books of Tim Ingold. I can only highly recommend the one Vom Wandern, Neue Wege zu einer alten Kunst. So for all German speakers, please read this one. Probably his most well-known book has also been translated into English, and that is Sustainability, a Cultural History. Also, please read this one in case you're interested. And now, please welcome with a digital applause, so to say, Ulrich Grober. Ulrich, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself. Cannot hear you yet.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, I'm still under the spell of the very subtle philosophical and poetic reflections of Professor Ingold. Guten Tag, alle miteinander. Hello, good evening, good afternoon, you all. Thank you for inviting me to your conference. Now, what's my message in a bottle? Let me summarize it in 3 buzzwords. The first is wow. It's all about the sense of wonder. The second is for real. Only where you've been on foot, you've been for real. It's ascribed to Goethe, but I'm not quite sure. The third is landmarks. I'm getting back to the ground, as you see. In other words, listen to the storytelling of landscapes and of local people. Okay, let's start with a big wow. It's just a 3-letter word, not even a word, just an expression or an interjection. You all know it, probably use it frequently. It's ranking very high in the global vocabulary of the social media, along with oh my God and awesome, which are somewhat synonyms. Wow, Professor Ingold, you can correct me, as far as I know, has its roots in medieval Scottish. It was used as an expression of being overwhelmed with delight and amazement. From there, it migrated into American English slang. Myself, I picked it up from a novel by Jack Kerouac, On the Road, which is, 60s stuff. I don't know if it's still popular with you. Let me define what I mean with the term wow moment. It has to do with your body language. It's a moment of an eye contact which gets intensive and holds on. It's an eye contact with a phenomenon that catches your attention and leads to a moment of undivided attention and suspended time. Often, it is accompanied by a shudder. That means the fine hair on your skin get raised upright. Maybe a chill is running down your back. We call it goosebumps, in German Gänsehaut, Schauer. Of course, such reactions can be caused by confronting negative phenomena, fearful shocks, leading to a state of fear, of angst. What I am talking about here are moments of positive emotions, joyful amazement, fascination, admiration, enchantment, Verzauberung, awe, reverence. Moments that inflame your sense of wonder. Now here is, I think, an important term for you, the sense of wonder. As far as I can see, it was coined in the early 1960s by the American ecologist and activist Rachel Carson. She is best known for her book, Silent Spring, which was so influential in the beginnings of the worldwide ecological movement. Carson found the term while walking. In fact, by walking with a child along the seashore, introducing her to the wonders of marine life on the beach and in the ocean's tides and currents. In her essay, The Sense of Wonder, she referred to the Brothers Grimm tale about Dornröschen, the Sleeping Beauty, and she wrote, if I had influence with a good fairy who is to preside over the christening of all children, I should ask that her gift to all children in the world be a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout life. I can wholeheartedly relate to that. My wife, my daughter, and I just spent 2 weeks with our little granddaughter visiting us from Berlin. Milla is living just 1 year and 3 months on this beautiful earth. Her way of showing her sense of wonder was stretching out her little arm, pointing with her index finger at something that had caught her attention, uttering a jubilant da. There, her current equivalent to wow. Rachel Carson goes on to discuss the relationship between feeling and knowing. Quote, I sincerely believe that it is not half so important to know as to feel. If facts are the seeds that later produce knowledge and wisdom, then the emotions and the impressions of the senses are the fertile soil in which the seeds must grow. Rachel Carson's credo, the winds, the sea, and the moving tides are what they are. If there is wonder and beauty and majesty in them, science will discover these qualities. For the philosophical and spiritual background, let me point out that Carson was inspired by the ideas of Albert Schweitzer, the famous jungle doctor, pacifist, and humanitarian activist, and his ethics of reverence for life. Summarized in the sentence, I am life that wants to live in the midst of life that wants to live. I might add that a contemporary thinker, the philosopher Theodor Adorno, believed that the moment of shower, stands at the origin of religion and art. Reverence for life, shudder, emotions as the fertile soil in which the seeds of scientific knowledge grow. Isn't there a grain of wisdom for your project? My point is, let your innate sense of wonder be your basic GPS, your global positioning system on your long journey through the landscapes of Europe and the airs of Europe. Reconnecting your sense of wonder gives you a fundamental orientation. It wouldn't work if you were looking at the world through a windshield or on a motorcycle. It doesn't fully work when you're monitoring the world on the screen of your laptop, nor on the display of your smartphone. It works best whenever you get in touch with the fullness of life around you with all your senses by walking. Heeding the call of your wow moments while walking, taking notes, making pictures, discussing them in depth, that seems to me a good way of gathering profound knowledge and deep understanding. My second point is reflecting the term for real. What's the value of getting in touch with the real world on foot by walking, hiking? Contemporary urban life has one important feature, Professor Ingold spoke about it, that dominates our perception of what's going on around us. Sociologists call it acceleration. It's about the speeding up of our means of transport. We can reach any point on the globe within 24 hours, but space disappears. Acceleration is also about fast changing patterns of producing and consuming commodities, about growing markets. It's about the speeding accumulation of data. It's about the rapid increase of options, activities, social contacts, even intimacy happen faster but more superficial. We do more things simultaneously and non-stop. Linear time, measured by clock and calendar, dominates us. We spend up to 90% of our time indoors, in the cabins of vehicles, and even longer in cyberspace. In the midst of all those impressions, the cascades of those impressions, there is a still stand. In cyberspace, for example, there is not the slightest breeze or fresh air, no natural sound, no natural light or color, nothing smells. To a certain degree, acceleration is inevitable and we can turn it into a productive force, but alienation is growing and getting more and more harmful to us. I have a strong suspicion that we desperately need complementary, contrasting, alternative ways of experiencing and exploring reality. Listen to a sentence ascribed to Goethe, the great Dichter und Denker, poet and thinker. As I said, I'm not sure if it's really his own words, but it certainly reflects his thinking. Nur wo du zu Fuß warst du wirklich. Only where you've been on foot, you've been for real. What happens to you when you walk, especially when you set off for a long distance walk? It's the most natural form of deceleration. You slow down, you reduce your speed to the human measure, the foot, the step, the speed of 2 or 3 miles per hour. Now, I have to rethink about this after listening to a thing called, but the cascade of images turns into a slow stream of impressions. They act upon all of your senses. It's raining, you get wet. The ground under your feet is stony or muddy, but it carries you. You immerse into varieties of microclimates, soundscapes, fragrance zones, changing axes and lines of sight. You experience space in all dimensions, left, right, above, below, near, far. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west, darkness, light, twilight, all have their times. You move and rest. You immerse into the time cycles and rhythms of nature and cosmos from which you've been alienated. Getting connected again, you gain a new quality of sensuality and deeper sense, a deeper understanding of the real world of reality, including the reality of extreme weather conditions, of climate change, of loss in biodiversity that is underway. Walking through forests dying away, walking along springs, creeks, and ponds that are running dry, walking on sunburned soils, provide you with a more profound understanding of what's really happening. Remember Rachel Carson's advice: feel and know, emotions and rational insights must come together. Getting in touch with the great outdoors and evaluating data in your laboratory or office must come together. One more lesson my little granddaughter Miller just taught me. She loves the game of there and gone. Disappearing behind the trunk of a big old oak tree, getting invisible, waiting for our calls. Miller's gone. Where is Miller? Appearing again from behind the tree with a big smile on her face. Ah, Miller's there, Miller's back. That was our favorite game during the last 2 weeks. Which leads me to Sigmund Freud. No talk in Vienna without Freud, right? Around 1900, Freud played this game with his daughter, aged 1.5 years. He called it Fort und da game. the there and gone game. And he analyzed that the child is simulating a very severe scenario, the disappearance of her mother out of her sight, and the existential fear that she's gone. The game sort of trains the confidence of the child that the mother will be back. Now, and that's my Gedankenspiel, Gedankenexperiment, thought experiment. Can we translate that game into our current fear that Mother Nature is leaving us when we need her the most? And can we gain confidence again that Gaia is coming back? So, yes, watch out for the traces of ecological deterioration, the dying trees, the sunburned soils, and reconnect to your sense of loss, your sense of grief. Turn your Trauerarbeit into a productive force of your ecological and political involvement. But just as important is the positive perspective. I hope you will gain on your long walk. Watch out for the landscapes that keep and constantly renew their ecological integrity. Watch out for what's regrowing on the deadwood, the pioneer vegetation, on the new clearings in the woods, on the soils and watersheds. Watch how nature turns on her dynamo. If you excuse this technical term, how she deals herself with climate change and with the loss of her old diversity, and how she gives life in the wilderness of tomorrow. Remember on your long walk, Henry David Thoreau's wisdom in wildness is the preservation of the world. And not, we might add, in the 21st century, in technology, engineering, human arrogance, and hubris. My third and last point this afternoon, think like a mountain. I understand and use this sentence in a double sense. First, you might translate it into the rhetoric coming from Silicon Valley or currently from the headquarters of the European Union, which is the imperative, think big. It's that moonshot thinking, the bold and optimistic way of confronting challenges and solving problems, typical for the 1960s. In the 2020s, climate science tells us that the time window for fundamentally changing our course is closing. So we certainly need a whole lot of bold spirit. And I'm sure that your climate walk project is and will be a fine example and an encouraging token. There is, however, another level of the term that I'd like to explain. Thinking like a mountain is about holistic thinking. It is about the integral approach. It means consider the web of life that's spinning around every place, even the tiniest spot on planet Earth. Consider how all man-made systems, the economy, the social system, are mere subsystems of biosphere. Thinking like a mountain is the title of an essay published by the American ecologist Aldo Leopold in 1949 as part of his Sand County Almanac. In the essay, he tells about the fierce green light he was watching in the eyes of a she-wolf, whom she shot and killed during a hunt in the Gila wilderness of New Mexico. He remembers the moment of shock when he suddenly realized what he's doing to the web of life in that wilderness area, which since ancient times had been the habitat of wolves. The removal of one single species, he realizes, has fatal consequences for the mountain range's ecosystem, The population of deer will increase rapidly. This will destroy the forest and the vegetation, giving access to the torrents of rain, which will lead to the erosion of the soils, etc. Quote, only the mountain has lived long enough to listen objectively to the howl of a wolf. End quote. The story, just 3 pages long, deals with the profound interconnectedness of all knots in the web of life. It's a lesson in reading a landscape. And then reconsider the meaning of the word empathy. It might be a key term for your project. The English word was coined around 1900 by the American psychologist Edward B. Titchener. As his blueprint, however, served the German term Einfühlung. This word was used in the German-speaking scientific community in the 19th century with a threefold meaning. It's Einfühlung, empathy with another person, the ability to share somebody else's feelings. The second meaning, it's Einfühlung in a work of art. And last but not least, it's Einfühlung, empathy for a phenomenon of nature, such as a tall tree or a torrential mountain creek that you encounter on your way through a landscape. It all starts by your eye contact with a Nicht-Ich, a non-I, with another person or with a natural phenomenon. In the words of the German psychologist Theodor Fischer, Ich und Nicht-Ich fließen zu einem rätselhaften Ganzen zusammen. I and non-I flow together, merge to a mysterious whole. Empathy starts, I might add, with a wow from your inner voice. Reading landscapes is an exciting exercise. It's different from reading books. It takes empathy and patience. It takes the ability to identify and decipher landmarks. Those are the places in our natural and cultural landscapes that are special because they open your eyes to what makes the landscape different. They must not be spectacular. It might be just a bench on the slope of a hill, which the locals set up on the spot with the most comprehensive view. It can be an orchard where they cultivate traditional varieties of apples. They might be, of course, the iconic lieux de mémoire, the places of memory through which landscapes start to tell their stories and start telling about the genius of the land. Genius loci. Wherever you encounter such landmarks, always remember that the local people know best. It is indispensable to get in touch. Make eye contact, make small talk, get involved with their stories, their problems and their solutions, their dreams and visions, and get them involved with yours. Keep in mind, climate change is a strong reality, but transformation towards sustainability is a strong reality as well. On your long walk, I suppose you will focus on the landmarks of change, on those places where climate change is drastically visible, and on those places where the emerging future becomes visible. A sustainable and livable future in harmony with nature. A future which provides the right to a good life for all beings, human and non-human. Let me finish by quoting the Indian novelist and activist Arundhati Roy in a speech in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 2001, 20 years ago. Now, she said, remember this, we are many and they are few. They need us more than we need them. Another world is possible. She is on her way. On a quiet day, if you listen very carefully, you can hear her breathing. I love this phrase. It embeds the vocabulary of change, transformation, and breakthrough into the metaphorics of pregnancy and giving birth. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ulrich, for this stunning and beautiful lecture and talk. Thank you very much for being here also today. I'm just looking at the chat if there are some comments or remarks popping up. There was one question actually by Diego Bühl, and he was saying, like, what's the book source of these writings? Would really love to get the book. And I mean, I think Vom Wandern hasn't been translated into English, has it? Or no, unfortunately not. So, but this book again is very warmly recommended, but it's only in German in this case. But I think in the sustainability, a cultural history book also, you will find some of Ulrich Grober's thoughts, and maybe you consult this to Diego. In the meantime, if there are no questions, I would have a question also myself. So you've been talking a lot about this sense of wonder, and I was just curious from the book and from your experiences also as a long distance hiker, how do you cultivate this sense of wonder? With which kind of gaze do you, wander through the either earth, the earth sky zone or through landscapes? Like, what is important to you when walking? How do you experience landscapes? Is there anything that, unexperienced or rather unexperienced walkers can learn or can cultivate?
Well, my latest way of training this sense is, as I said, watching my granddaughter walk. She's just learned the upright gait about a couple of weeks ago, around Christmas, I think. And it's an amazing experience to accompany her through the woods, walking with her through the snow and the mud in the last couple of days, and just walking by her side or walking behind her, no matter in which position, just watching closely and enjoying this experience. Now, when I start off on a long distance hike, it's a process of innehalten. I'm not sure how to translate this word. Before you set off, I usually, if it's possible, try to find a spot, an elevated spot, where I can overview the area which I'm going to walk through for the next couple of hours or even a couple of days. And then I stop and take my time to let my senses get acquainted with that, what I see before me. And then I find this state of mind, which I think allows me to open this gate, this doors of perception, as William Blake said, the British romantic writer, poet. Open your doors of perception as wide as possible. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for this answer. There has been one remark popping up in the chat. Joachim is saying that he loved the point on eye contact, and that in order to be able to relate to landscapes, one has to get in contact with the people who inhabit those landscapes. And I think this approach might certainly open the eyes to also more adverse aspects of the landscapes, which could go unnoticed if one is a traveler walking through. And he said also then, so what I take away is that there may be some tensions between journeying through a landscape and then inhabiting it. Yeah. Do you want to respond to that, what Joachim said here?
I'm grateful, Joachim, that you stressed this point. It's much too short in this 30 minutes talk, but it's of utmost importance. Yes, the local people, they are the ones who know the landscapes since generations, often who cultivate the land, who live off the land, and who have the strongest ties. I'm not neglecting the experts, you know, and the books on the landscape. I always read, try to read as much literature about the landscapes I'm going to hike through, but there's no substitution for talking to the local people, and they are eager to talk to you. Never underestimate their willingness and their interest in your questions and remarks about their environment. And they're the ones who are the best, the drivers of sustainable transformations. You know, it's you know, think globally but act locally. The old wisdom, and act locally is you know, the decisive factor in it.
Yes, thank you very much. There is also another question by Ria, so by ourselves, basically, how would you respond to that? How does walking enhance our understanding of climate change? I mean, how could we even grasp climate change somehow through walking? How can walking make us, you know, experience things that other forms, you know, of you know, perceiving or being in the world would could not?
It's the basic form, as far as I can see. It's complement all the other forms, or the different forms of perception, of knowledge, are complementary, and they're, of course, indispensable. Your scientific work in your office or laboratory is indispensable, but the experience of the real world, the ground, the air, the cloud, the snow, the mud, it is just the basics. That's the basics of life. It's the real life. Yeah.
Thank you for this answer. Are there any more questions or comments in the chat? I don't see any at this point. So thank you very much again for being here today, Ulrich. Thank you also, Tim, for being here. It was a great pleasure to have you both today. Also in this combination, I found it really interesting, and how you, both of you, how you complemented each other. I really like that. And we will now go over into a break. I think we're already, you know, have already spent a lot of time in front of our screens. So we will do a 15-minute break, or basically no, a little long actually. We will reconvene at 6:30, so at 18:30, with two other great speakers, and have a nice break. See you soon, and thank you, Tim Ingold and Ulrich Grober, for being here today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah. And I enjoyed listening to you, Ulrich. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The break is over, and I hope that you did something to refresh your mind in these 15 minutes, and that you're now full of energy for the remaining 2 talks that we have, because I think we have very exciting guests still tonight, and we will soon introduce them with Martin to you. But I think just as a reminder, I wanted to still say that we have purposefully selected a variety of speakers who are engaged with the topic of climate change from very different angles, and they do have very different perspectives on the same topic, and we strongly believe that this inter and transdisciplinary approach will help us to understand the phenomenon of climate change in a better way. And with this, I'm very happy to introduce you our first guest of the second session, Professor Ivan Foletti. He is a professor of art history at Masaryk University in Brno, where he specializes in the art of Milan, Rome, and the Caucasus in the late antique and early medieval periods. In his research, he explores the notion of sacred space as multimedia reality, considering all techniques and the performance of human bodies. His further research interests include the interaction between politics, ideologies, and art history from the 19th century Russia to 20th century Czechoslovakia and France, and the pilgrimage art of 12th and the 13th century. So please, Ivan, the floor is yours for the next 30 minutes from now on, and then we will continue with questions. Welcome to Vienna.
Thank you so much, Rima. It's wonderful for me to be speaking with you. I'm really, as usually in these times, depressed, don't being physically with you, but I pretty hope this is only a matter of time. And well, yes, as you already told it, I am to a certain degree an alien figure in the panorama of the fields which I've presented up to now, because I'm indeed an art historian dealing with very old stuff, and which are apparently not directly linked with climate changes, even if the ecology of the time and space is something which I find absolutely exciting through and over ages. And if there is something which is true, and we can say it about the past, that we were always in climatic crisis, especially the periods I was studying, even for very different purposes and reasons. Still, this was a question of ours. But today, and I will share you my screen, hopefully this will work. Okay, I would like to do the sharing screen advanced, so it will take 1 second more, but I hope this will work. Okay.
Perfect. We can already see it, so it seems to work perfectly.
Okay, so I will just move you to see you a bit, and this will, and I should go to PowerPoint back, and we are done, I believe. So, okay. Oh. The only point I cannot move, yeah, this moves like that, but not with the cursor. Okay, so as you see, the title of today's lecture is Walking, a Tool for Discovering the Past. And actually, I would like to focus maybe on the second crucial aspect of your project, which is the question of walking. Because I believe walking is something which is becoming more and more a tool for better understanding of the reality, the climatic reality, but I would also say many other levels. And there is something which I would like to say just at the very beginning. This is that according to me, and I hope that in this not a complete alien, is more and more hard to dissociate, let's say, nature from the, let's say, culture. I do see the both levels are perfectly interacting together. And so I will be more speaking about the cultural level today, but still, I hope we will find really common places to understand each other in this sense. And why I do speak about this series of questions? Well, this is because already since 2012, I've started to walk with my students of art history on medieval pilgrimage roads. So on the image I'm showing you right now, you see our, well, already 9 walks we did all around, especially France, Italy, Austria, and and this is Italy, Austria, and France. We walked over 4,000 kilometers in these last years. And this was at the very beginning a challenging way of sharing experiences between students and teachers, of going beyond what is usually part of academia, so the certain barrier between students and teachers. But then in following steps, this became something more interesting, because we started to understand that our perception of what we are investigating, which is culture from very past, is suddenly becoming different from our perspective when looking at it as pilgrims. So our research question became what the experiences of walking is actually doing with our perception of the world. And here I see the first point of connection, because we decided not to be running on a horse all around Europe, but would like to walk. And actually walking became for us a way of perceive differently the world around us, and this will be the conclusive part of my lecture, but still the world started to be seeing us in a different way. So slowly we start to elaborate, let's say, a theory. This theory was based on the idea that human beings are changing enormously through centuries in terms of cultural background, know-how, and understanding of the world. But is there something which do not change within the human experience? Well, this is actually the act of walking. Human being is the being who walks on 2 feet. And according to analysis which have been done on the experience of walking, we can say that from the pre-modern to the modern and contemporary era, the movement of walking, the physical action of walking is actually the same. Only difference being the fact that the shoes from the 16th century on are having another shape. So we can actually postulate that even if everything changes from the cultural perspective, from the today's societies to the past, the movement of walking is something which is uniting our experience with one of the women and the men of the past in a sort of pre-cultural and biological way. And our first postulate was thus, and is thus, that thanks to the walking, we are approaching experiences going beyond the culture, uniting nature and culture into experience. First premise. Second premise is, which for a group of anthropologists seems to banal, but for art historian was not so banal, is that the anthropology of the body and the embodiment became something really important into the scholarship of the last years. And this companion, of course, is showing too. And actually an embodied term occurs also in my field. So basically, we started to be trying to understand visual, material, and cultural evidences through the prism of the body. And the second half of my slide is there to remember a third question, which is that the embodied movement, that the experience of the walk as such, to a certain extent, created a hiatus between the daily experience of virtual existence through screens and any other experiences. Now, walking is today one of the rare moments, especially when we walk for a long time, where the body and the embodiment is becoming something full, differently from the other situations in the world, where through the screens, we are to a certain extent leaving our body. So we are in between the body and something else. I will return to it, but just to say that I see a dichotomy, which is absolutely inherent to today's world, and especially the COVID time, where the screens became kind of obsessive, compulsive presence of everything. This difference between the walking, being my body, and the rest of the life, where I am half screen, half body, is something quite interesting. So these are the three premises, which leads me to my structure. So what I would like to present you today briefly is to go through 3 steps. The first one, called present between expectation and memory, is actually my try to describe how a prolongated walk is transforming the perception of the time, and through this perception of the time, the perception of the world all around. Secondly, within this sparse time, landscape, and encounter, I will try to do something quite crazy. I will try to adopt the gaze of the present looking to the past in order to understand whether we have or not aspects which through the experience of the present body can lead us to better understand the past and to a certain extent, if you pardon me, the future as well. Because if my hypothesis is correct, that is that the human walking body is going beyond culture, this is giving us a tool to understand past and present and possibly future reactions towards culture, but not only. Well, and the last point is just to understand it in a frame which I would define largely social. So let's go to the first point, between the expectation and memory, the present, the time of the present. What is my starting point? Well, my starting point is that actually walking, as you will do it, and as we are doing it, meaning in one unique direction for a long time, is something quite exceptional today, just totally exceptional, but this was also exceptional in the past cultures. These 3 illustrations just to say that if you are imagining what was the walking in 19th century cultures and what is up today walking mainly, this is usually going in a limited space all around or in one direction and back. This can be done often in past culture. This was linked to daily practices. And well, these 2 photographs remind that kids were going to school 8 kilometers each day and back. Processions were done by foot. I mean, the life of the 19th century, early 20th, but of course, all the pre-modern time was determined by walking as an essential movement. But except for very few situations, human beings were not walking in one direction for a while. Of course, there were exceptional merchants and pilgrims, but these were exceptional categories. So, to a certain extent, today is just crazy to walk for 1,500 kilometers in one. And to this extent, it was crazy as well 1,000 years ago. This was not normal, neither usual. Now, why this is so interesting? Well, because in the late 70s, at least these 2 books published by Logliner, McManus and D'Aquili opened a very specific understanding of what is happening with the human body when this human body walks for a long time. What these 3 scholars are describing in these late 70s, basing on, let's say, biological experiences, is that to the human body is occurring something they are calling synchronization of mind and body. And this is a crucial point. Synchronization of mind and body. What does that mean really? I mean, this sounds well, but what does it mean? Well, they are describing this as a state where the human body, and the brain especially, becomes more open to experiences which are going beyond what we know usually into the natural space of our daily lives, and that we are opening to something beyond the senses. They are typically speaking about mystical experiences. Basically, they are saying, if you walk for 1,000 kilometers, you're going to start to have visions. I should say that having walked for a while, I can confirm that I did not have visions, but I actually experienced an altered state of mind. Yes. This was, I'm usually describing it as having 2 deciliter of a very strong red wine. You are not drunk, but you are not on your normal mood either. So this is really an altered state. Now, why this is important? Because if walking was always part of human culture, and now is less, but still, the long walking with this transformative effect on body and mind is something which was exceptional, and it is exceptional. And once you experience this exceptionality, you suddenly start to understand the visual culture and the monuments of the pre-modern era as something which is from the embodied perspective, different. So, for example, arriving to the tympanon of Boileau-sur-Dordogne in the 12th century, in this alternated state of mind, you start to understand why and how it was possible to, for example, have a vision in front of an image, because the body and the mind were transformed. So this is the frame, the biological frame. Now, what is to me important is that this frame is biological, and at the same time, this is just part of something larger. This larger is a complete mixing between nature and culture. Why do I need that? Well, let's start. This is a partial joke, but it is just to show that when you are walking, the time, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be a movie, but I don't know if it's possible now. Okay, I'm sorry, it was a movie where it was just represented how fast you walk and how fast goes a train. It was just to show that when you are walking, you are actually slowing down, considering the present day technologies, but at the same time, I would say you are still walking very fast and you are immersed within the landscape. Now, why this point is for me important? Because actually, if there is something which, apart the transformed body, is important for a pilgrim, is to reach the sacred place or the holy place, right? The pilgrim has a goal, as you will have goals. Slowing down the time and entering in the mantric rhythmicity of the body permanently in movement, something quite astonishing is appearing in this transformed body. And this is a banal but extremely important expectation. More you walk and more your expectations are growing. And this is happening on a mental, cultural level, but this is also happening with your body because the body is becoming more and more synchronized. When you walk through a landscape, and you should admit the landscape is the majority of the experience of the walker or pilgrim, this multisensory natural environment, and I use on purpose the multisensory word because all senses are involved when walking in the landscape. I feel the cold, I'm smelling the nature, I'm hearing the bird, I am seeing the landscape with all these beauties, but I'm also receiving snow or water and whatever can fall down from the sky. All that is part of a multisensory experience of the landscape. And then suddenly, while walking, on the horizon, you see an apparition of a moment of culture. On one side, we see Saint-Benoît, 11th century abbey, on the other, Orléans, the Cathedral of Orléans. What is happening at this point? This is really interesting, because I can absolutely testify that you experience an arrival of adrenaline, which makes with your body something quite radical. So your cultural expectation in a slow and regular time of the walk, which is making grow your expectation, is suddenly becoming a first level of physical and cultural joy while you see from far. And then approaching, you reach the place. And all the expectation and the slow time is suddenly accelerating in order to make you experience something unique. This unicity is thus amplified by what your body did during the approaching, which took weeks. And then, for the pre-modern pilgrim, as well as for us, reaching Conques or the Mont Saint-Michel meant also to reach what we can call the Celtic foca. So the very epicenter of popular devotion, which for us, art historian, was exceptional monuments of art, such as the Sainte Foy, the golden sculpture, the oldest European 3D sculpture, rebuilt probably in the 9th century with pieces from oldest period and then having a long life. All the expectation, the long and slow time of walking, accelerated by the endorphins and adrenalines arriving to the body. and by this progressive synchronization, are suddenly amplifying this experience. Now, sorry for the slide, which is a bit too much, but still. Endorphins, adrenalines, together with cultural expectations, are opening your brain to see and understand in a way you would never be seeing into understanding. And having experienced this, I can of course have a totally different gaze on the past cultures and on their expectation and experiences of sacred. Even in a completely like experience as was ours, suddenly we start to understand the frame of a movement going beyond the senses, thanks to the senses. Just to complete the panorama, I would like to add one further point, which is that if the modern pilgrim to Compostela is usually walking alone, we are always walking in group. When we did the longest pilgrimage of 4 months, we were 12 of us walking together. And in this sense, we were closer to the experiences of the past, because in the pre-modern period, people were of course walking in group because it was much more secure. It's crazy to walk alone through Europe in 12th century. You would probably be killed. Now, this is adding to whatever I just discussed, also the communitarian effect. You discuss your expectation. So you are rationalizing the fact that you are waiting. So in this slow time before reaching the sacred place, you are kind of sharing it. And what is also remarkable, that once you leave this place and you are back into the slow rhythmicity of the walking, you are re-elaborating all that in your memory. So what is the time of the pilgrim? Long expectation, incredible apex, and long-lasting remembering. The experience of the pilgrim is thus, and of any people walking for long, thanks to body, culture, and community, a movement between memory and hope. Now, what is tricky is that if you take one of the most authoritative texts from the pre-modern period defining time, you arrive exactly to my same conclusion. It is what Augustine writes in his Confessions about the time. There are 3 times: a present of things past, a present of things present, a present of things future. For these 3 exist in the mind, and I find them nowhere else. The present of things past is memory, the present of things present is sight, and the present of things future is expectation. So this is something which, through the embodied experience of walking, permitted us to reach the position of Augustine. And actually, the time of the walk is suddenly arriving to a level which we can define either pre-cultural or pre-modern. But the pilgrim or the person who walks for a long time is experiencing something totally different from what we are used to understand, time, space. This leads me to my second part, time, landscape, and encounter. What I will now do very fast is to go through a 4th century text written by a pilgrim, Egeria, who reached the Holy Land probably in the 80s of the 4th century. I will now do it by paying attention to the text as never did it before. No one did it before, because I would be doing so through what I just described to you. So through the steps of expectation, memory, and meeting. And suddenly, I'm discovering something which I find tricky. So, Egeria is describing her first approaching of the mountain Sinai. And she's writing, meanwhile, as we walk, we arrive to a certain place where the mountains between which we were passing opened themselves out and formed a great valley, very flat and extremely beautiful. And beyond the valley appeared Sinai, the holy mount of God. The spot where the mountain opened themselves out is united with the place where the graves of lust. And when we came there, those holy guides were with us, bade us in saying, it is a custom that prayer be offered by those who come hither, when first from this place the mount of God is seen. So what Ijiri is describing is actually exactly the reaction you feel on your body when walking for a while. You reach the place, not you reach, you just see the place with the eyes. A 12th century text describes a miracle happening at the Mont Saint-Michel in northern France, Normandy. During nights, the mount was illuminated by the presence of the angel. And it is what is described in this source. They thus realized that the fire they saw was nothing else than Saint Michel visiting with his companion the mount, his church and house. And this night, the truly descent among his people. The brink light demonstrated that he had brought many angels. On this night, on the ways of the mount, one can find many pilgrims staying up and expecting in case they would see St. Michael descending from the sky. My God, how happy is he who can see this light. Now, let's not speak about how this light were done. Probably monks were putting fire inside the church, but this is not the point. The point for me is another one. Into the pre-modern perception, the sacred is something which goes beyond the borders and make the one who arrives walking, entering the presence of the sacred already by gaze and sound in this case. By the way, just to make it clear, in the pre-modern cultures, sound of bells is seen as more than a sound, because on 12th century bells we have regular text which are writing, I am fighting against the devil, I am protecting the one who hears me. Basically, monument, objects, and sources from the pre-modern period are actually confirming that approaching a holy place from a pre-modern perspective is exactly the same movement we are experiencing as contemporary person while approaching a place of desire. No matter whether this is a sacred place or just a place we will have food and refreshment. It's not the point. The point is the desire amplified and the landscape transformed by this desire. Only seeing, only approaching make us enter into space. There is, however, another point which I love, and this is once more back to Etheria, who is walking to the holy place. Walking. She was a rich Roman, so she was actually going in a chariot, but. And so, Christ our Lord commanding us, we were encouraged by the prayers of the holy men who accompanied us, and after the labor was great, for I had to ascend on foot, so she had to walk, because the ascent could not be made in the chair. Yet, I did not feel it, to that extent that the labor was not felt, because I saw that the desire which I had to being fulfilled by the commandment of God, and so on and so on. The point is that she's describing the adrenaline. She gets that bloody adrenaline. And it's the reason why she ran up the Sinai, which is everything but a small mountain you climb up with pleasure. Thanks to the adrenaline. And, very interesting, once she arrived up to the Sinai, and this is a view from the Sinai, she's confused. Because of the Sinai, there is nothing like a cultic focus. There is not an epicenter she would like to reach. But then she looked at the landscape. She's amazed by the beauty of the landscape. And she sees the presence of God all around the landscape. Then, pursuing, she's of course remembering and rewriting what she had just seen on the Sinai. What I am trying to say is that looking to the 4th and 12th century sources, and this was just a selection because I don't want to bore you with it, we can actually see exactly the same mechanism as contemporary walkers pilgrims are experiencing. The very strange rhythmicity transforming body and mind is actually provoking very similar reaction over the time. Now, this leads me to my third point and my conclusion, which will be very fast to say in 30 minutes. one aspect is what is happening with you while walking with your group. But then there is the other story. And of course, as anthropologists, you may know much better than I the writings of Victor and Edith Turner. And especially this book, which was published in the late 70s, Image and Pilgrimage in Christian Culture. Victor and Edith Turner actually are proposing to read the experience of pilgrimage following the Turnerian classical trilogy of liminal rituals, right? Preliminal, liminal, and postliminal. What they're proposing actually is that pilgrimage is entirely a liminal space. In the preliminal space, before leaving, you should accomplish some rituals, and then you are leaving your position in society to become a pilgrim, and you will never return to be someone else before finishing your pilgrimage. According to the both Turner, actually the pilgrim is in an egalitarian and ideal society. And the book has been deeply criticized, especially because of that, because this was a bit idealistic, isn't it? That becoming pilgrim would lose the social barriers and constructions. But in the last years, especially in the research of Anne Bailey, actually, I've seen a certain rehabilitation of Victor and Edith Turner, especially for example, situations of past freedom of women. Women had never so much freedom in pre-modern societies as when they were pilgrims. It was possible to access spaces like in churches which were inaccessible otherwise. But what is for me more important is that actually I totally agree with the both Turners, and you will experience it as well. Once you are becoming pilgrim, and just for the word, when I left for my longest walk, I was speaking, we're gonna walk, as you are doing it, walking, climate walk, great. Actually, quite fast, it was impossible to continue to be speaking about the walk. We start to speak about pilgrim because the situation, I mean, transculturally, is the one of the pilgrimage, when you walk in one direction from one point to the other. Without religious connotation, this is not the point. The point is that this is something so different. This is not just a walk. This is something different because of the direction. Anyhow, what we have experienced is that you're really living in a liminal situation. You can do stuff you cannot do in any other situation. And this is accepted by the people around you. Just to make one example, we spent some 60 nights outside. And since we were really punk, we were walking without money almost, and without a place to stay, because being 12, we never know where to sleep. From the 60 nights outside, we were welcomed 43 times by anonymous person we never met before, neither after. These people welcome us in their houses, gave us food, and just welcome us in their places. Now, apart from the fact that at that point, this gave me a huge optimism just about what Europe is, because you just arrive. Certain times we were just asking for help because it was raining or snowing. Other times we were just even not asking, and people are opening the doors to welcome us. But my point is another one. My point is that actually people were simply feeling that we are different, that our bodies and minds are different, and they were behaving in a way we never behaved normally. I mean, just approaching villages, people were coming out with food and water, I mean, without asking anything. My impression was thus that this was the result of our liminal situation, which was understandable beyond the cultural barriers, or at least beyond the big European structures. Now to conclude, I have, I believe, 1 minute left. What I'm trying to say is that for us, as medieval art historians, walking became a tool to ask new questions to the past. Having experienced pre-cultural reaction for our own body, we started to look to sources, objects, and text within a very different framework. At the same time, I believe we, to a certain extent, confirmed the Turnerian's intuition about walk, long walk, and or pilgrimage as something which is going beyond culture, not only into the perception, but also in the reception by the other. Thus, I believe that walking is a tool for seeing world in his culture and nature differently, and is a tool for being seen and perceived in a different way. And I believe this is groundbreaking, because this changes the structure of many of our experiences. 30 minutes 00. Thank you for that.
Wow, I have to say, and I think I can certainly now use that word from the previous lecture. It fits so well here, because I think it was great that you brought that different angle into the discussion, and it was incredible also to hear that walking seems to have this spiritual dimension as well. And let's see what there is in the chat. I think the chat, at least my chat, has been active here, and I will now read some questions to you. I think the first one is a comment. It's a really nice comment to you, which says, off topic, but I'm Slovakian studying in Vienna, and the Czech vibes from this talk are just heartwarming. So thank you, Ivan, for that. And then we have a question from Rafael. I would have a question related to endorphins in the process of walking. As you said, endorphins do open our brain in a specific way. And the more I am experiencing hiking or running, the more I'm wondering if a life without this experience of fulfillment is even possible. I know one can get dependent
on endorphins, yes, definitely.
On this feeling, but maybe it's just natural. I think about it in regards to our modern way of life, and the general lack on walking people are suffering from, I suppose. Do you want to comment?
Of course, no,
that,
which is absolutely evident. I mean, we are absolutely transformed by endorphins, and yes, we are addicted to them. This is something natural. It makes really sense in our humanity. So I would say that this is something so important, and we cannot live without. Of course, this is something when you walk for a while, you start to imagine your entire life while walking. This is something clear.
I think there was another practical question. Someone's internet is not so good. I just want to comment here that everything is being recorded, so you can just watch it later. Yes. Are there any other questions? You can just write them into the chat. But as while people are writing, I have one question for you. Because I was thinking when you said that you were walking together with a group of 12 people, what was the, how do I say, I mean, what were the biggest challenges of walking in a big group like that? Or how would you explain the difference of like walking alone or then walking, what can we gain from walking in a bigger group?
It's amazing and very hard at the same time. I mean, we touched our limits in a very strong way because we spent really 123 days together, 24 hours, 24. It was really hard to this extent. And so what are the two elements? I would say on the one side, this was amazing because you're really sharing something unique which transformed our lives forever, I would say. And this creates a feeling of community and belonging, which is unique. And at the same time, this touches really all the limits of our egocentric lives. So suddenly you should work within a collective, but in every sense, starting, I'm sorry to be so detailed, but from toilets. If everybody's making a break for toilets when she or he wants, that means that we are basically on toilets all along the day, because with 12 persons it makes a lot. So it means a certain order and well, taking enormously care of the other. And also this necessarily opens the question of authority. Because if you are 12 people together and you wish to decide in a totally consensual way, then you will probably never arrive to reach your goal, because whether you have a group of incredibly capable persons, super tolerant and able to really constantly be in dialogue 100% of the time, or, which I believe is more realistic, you should really be able to construct a clear leadership, which is helping the group to work together.
Okay, the chat seems to be quiet, but I have one last question. I'm really interested about this. I mean, when I introduced you, I said that you're a professor of art history. So how does an art historian all of a sudden think that walking might be like the method to explore more about my topic or subject?
This is quite interesting, because I would say this starts with really passion for the walk as such. I always like to walk, and also, and this is something which we know is beyond the culture, the adventure of walking. I mean, the pre-modern pilgrims, as we are now doing it, were loving to go to this unknown world, this freedom, this incredible freedom that you just wake up somewhere, you walk, and you don't know where you will be sleeping in the evening. You have just no idea. You are following your path. You know basically the direction, the cities you should cross. And then this is freedom. And well, for me also, and this is something which is more and more relevant to me, especially now, it was the freedom of being out of the net, being out of the connected world, right? Thanks to this salvage way of life, we had, of course, some phones, but they were off because they were there for accidents, not for communicating, because we never knew when the next time we will have electricity. And so this was also something really linked to a desire of an intellectual freedom. And this also goes to the question of the group. We went so far within the talking and thinking together. We start really to experience a shared research, but really to a level you cannot imagine, because we had the time to talk for hours each day on the same topics, going beyond and beyond. And when we went back, we wrote a book on this experience. It's called Migrating Art History in Secret Ways, which is half experience and half hard art history on the monuments. Well, the students were working with us, some of them were like bachelor degree, early master. And if you read the level of what they wrote, this is top research, because they had the time to really go deeply in as never in their academic lives.
Thank you. I think like with every answer that you give me, I would have another 3 questions, but as time is running, I unfortunately can't ask anymore. So I will now hand over to Martin, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, it was a pleasure. See you very soon, hopefully.
Oh, and there was, by the way, now I just saw there is some comment in the chat that just came in now. So maybe you want to read it and comment maybe in the chat while we continue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Ivan, for being here. It was such a brilliant and stunning talk. Very interesting. Thank you.
Learned more about the method of walking and how different that can be when you look at the method from various different angles. And I think for us as anthropologists, it's always interesting to learn about new ways how people experience this walking. And yeah, we are now at the end of this lecture, and next week we will have another session. Now we have 3 weeks in a row, and then we promise that you will get an Easter break in between. I know that these evenings are very long for all of you, but thanks for bearing with us this long. Next week, our guests will be Stefan Klatzel from the University of Vienna. Then we have Jan Hardeczki from the University of Ostrava, Thomas Kleid from the University of Vienna, and Lore van Praag from the University of Antwerp. So this is what we can expect from next week. So the format will be the same as this week. We'll have 30 minutes talks with 15 minutes of questions. In case you have any questions about the formalities of this course, how you will get your grade, either watch the video from last time. These are the perks of having recorded sessions. We don't have to repeat ourselves, or you just go on Moodle and check there in the folders, and you will find how to get the grade for your class. With this, I think we wish you a wonderful evening and see you next week. Bye.